you for the thank you for the invitation. Thank you for showing up to listen to me. So like Erkow just said, I'll be talking about something called the Giroux correspondence. Everything I say today is joint work with Ko Honda and Yang Huang. And if you're curious, here's a QR code that should take you, if it works, it should take you to the archive preprint page for the preprint that I'm talking about. All right. So just so you know what's coming, here's the plan. Here's the outline for the talk. The Giroux correspondence, what is it? It's a correspondence between two things. On the one hand, you have contact structures, and on the other hand, you have something called an open book decomposition. So I'll do my duty and I'll give a quick background discussion of these things, and that will include some kind of important historical, cultural context as well. So then after the background, I'll talk about the main results, one of which is due to my collaborators that I wasn't a part of, but it's kind of an important precursor to what I was a part of, which is this correspondence result. And then with any remaining time, I'll see what I can say about how this works, the proof idea. So that's the plan. I have the chat open, so feel free to ask questions or complain or give me compliments in the chat, or you can feel free to interrupt me as well. Okay. So really quickly, you may all know what a contact structure is, but just in case, what is it? A contact structure is a certain type of geometric structure on odd dimensional manifolds. So this is what I'm interested in today, odd dimensional manifolds. Contact structure is a type of hyperplane distribution. It's a hyperplane subbundle of the tangent bundle. And the thing that makes it a contact structure is that it is as not integrable as possible. It's sort of as twisty as possible. There's a way that you can formulate this condition at the level of differential forms, which is in some sense the most convenient way to do this. So if you write your hyperplane distribution as the kernel of a one form called a contact form, the contact condition by Frobenius to be as not integrable as possible means that alpha wedge b alpha to the n, which is a top rank form, this should be non-zero. In particular, every contact manifold is orientable. Okay, so here's the main example, just in dimension 3, but there's sort of a natural generalization to all dimensions. This is called the standard contact structure on R3, and it actually serves as a universal local model for every contact structure. So if you zoom in close enough to any contact structure, it's going to look exactly like this. Contact structures satisfy a Darboux theorem, just like symplectic structures. Okay, so you can sort of see the twistiness as follows. First of all, you can check the contact condition, and then the kernel of this one form, so it cuts out a plane at every point, and the y coordinate gives you the zx slope of these planes. So now if you look at me, so my y-axis is going into the computer, which means it's going out of your computer, I guess, but y equals 0, positive y, positive slope, negative y, negative slope. So these contact planes twist like this. So if you talk to people that do contact topology, you see them doing this all the time. I guess Erkow might have some trouble doing that now with his broken hand, but okay. So for what it's worth, there's this standard example on R3, and you can compactify it to an example on S3. Or in other words, there's a contact structure on S3 called the standard contact structure, such that if you puncture S3 at a point, you get exactly this. Okay, and then just so we're all, I don't know, oriented on something, what's the goal of contact topology, or what is a goal of contact topology? It's the kind of goal you'd expect in any field of math, which is you want to classify these structures on any given odd dimensional manifold. You want to classify them up to a natural notion of equivalence, which is isotopy of your structures through contact structures. So I guess that's what I do. I'm a contact topologist, and I suppose my life's mission is to classify contact structures. Okay, so who cares? If you haven't seen this definition before, it's kind of weird. Even if you have seen it before, it's still kind of weird. But it is, on the one hand, it's kind of the natural boundary geometry of symplectic topology. So if you have a symplectic manifold, say with boundary, or if you look at a hypersurface inside of a symplectic manifold, very often, not always, but usually you should expect to see that hypersurface or that boundary come equipped with a contact structure. So contact topology is the boundary topology of symplectic topology. So if you care about symplectic topology, then I claim you care about contact topology. In particular, if you try to do symplectic topology by chopping up your symplectic manifold into simpler pieces and then gluing them back together, contact structures are the natural sort of structure that you get on the regions that you do these sort of cutting and gluing operations. The other thing I'll say is that I think over the past 30, 40 years, symplectic topology and contact topology have become a really big area of study, in part because of how useful they have been in low dimensional topology. For example, for instance, it turns out that every orientable three manifold has a contact structure. In general, it has many. Some of them are kind of boring, where by boring, I mean over-twisted. That means something to you. But many of them are interesting. The ones that are sort of geometrically sensitive or tell you a lot about the topology of your manifold, these are so-called tight contact structures. And you can learn a lot about just good old topology by thinking about the contact structures that you find on your manifold. Sort of a related comment, I'll just point out that very deep area or technique in low dimensional topology is the use of Floer theories, like Heegard-Floer, Seiberg-Witten-Floer. There's one called embedded contact homology. This is due to Hutchings and Taubes, and it's a Floer theory for three manifolds that's actually defined using a contact structure. It's just a smooth invariant, yet you define it using a contact structure, and then it turns out, very deep result, that all of these things are isomorphic. So there's a lot of deep math, even if you just care about smooth topology, there's a lot of deep math hidden in contact structures. Okay, but if you're paying attention, the title of my talk was something, something, something arbitrary dimensions. So why in the world should anyone care about contact structures in higher dimensions beyond 3? So just a few comments towards that. The first of which is a very deep numerical fact. Let's say, for example, you care about 4-dimensional symplectic topology. Maybe you just care about 4-dimensional topology, but then it's natural then to care about 4-dimensional symplectic topology. Well, 4-dimensional symplectic topology very naturally interacts with 3-dimensional contact topology because 4 is next to 3. But 4 is also next to 5. And this is maybe a less exploited relationship, but it's kind of at the heart of a lot of things that I think about, which is the interaction of, say, 4-dimensional symplectic topology with 5-dimensional contact topology. There's a rich connection there as well. And I would consider this a sort of high-dimensional contact topology thing. So as another example, there's a really well-known problem or kind of class of problems in symplectic topology, which I've phrased this way. vaguely, you can ask, how much can symplectic topology see smooth topology? In particular, suppose you had a pair of manifolds that were homeomorphic, but not diffeomorphic. You can ask if their cotangent bundles are symplectomorphic. So for example, if you had a pair of exotic 4 manifolds, their cotangent bundles would be 8-dimensional symplectic manifolds. And in general, we don't know. This is a very hard question that has kind of guided a lot of symplectic topology research, but you can ask, how much does the 8-dimensional symplectic topology, how much smooth 4-manifold topology does it see? Related to that is kind of a contact knot version of the problem. So here's what you can do. Take a smooth knot in R3. Then if you look at the cotangent bundle of R3, so that's a 6-dimensional symplectic manifold, look at its boundary. So maybe a disk cotangent bundle or something, look at its boundary. That's a 5-dimensional contact manifold. And then to the smooth knot in that 5-dimensional contact manifold, you can associate a certain kind of unknotted torus, the conormal torus. It's Legendrian, whatever that means. It's compatible with the contact structure. And it turns out that this is actually, so the Legendrian kind of contact isotopy type of this unknotted torus, it's a complete smooth knot invariant. So understanding, Legendrian surfaces inside of a 5-dimensional contact manifold can inform you a lot about knot theory. Okay, that's my pitch for high-dimensional contact topology. It's also just interesting and kind of hard. Now, this is a really important slide for the rest of the talk. Kind of the heart of the talk is captured in a slide like this. So it turns out that there's kind of a big difference in vibe between contact topology in dimension 3 and contact topology in higher dimensions. For reasons that I'll continue to discuss throughout the talk, contact topology is much harder in dimension 5 and above. And a witness to that is just the following fact. It's just an example of a fact. But so in dimension 3, over the past 20, 30 years, there have been tons and tons of classification results. For instance, one of the earliest achievements in the field, due to work of people like Ellie Ashberg, was to give a complete classification for contact structures on S3. But by contrast, you can ask about S5, and we basically don't know. We don't know anything. There's partial work in higher dimensions. All of the boring contact structures have been classified. But as far as interesting contact structures go, we have no clue. There are no classification results at all. So a result like this kind of tells you that, okay, there's some sort of big, I don't know, philosophical divide between 3-dimensional contact topology and higher dimensional contact topology. You could ask why. It's a vague question, but what's the deal there? And so I have a picture here. I'm going to give a vague answer, but maybe one of my goals for the talk is by the end, I'll kind of convince you, or I'll breathe some more meaning into a picture like this. But the way I see it is that contact topology in any dimension is kind of sandwiched between 2 symplectic dimensions. In particular, contact topology in dimension 2n+1 is sort of founded on the symplectic topology a dimension below. That's a vague statement. I'll make this more precise later on. But if you run with that idea for the moment, you can kind of see why dimension 3 is so special. Three-dimensional contact topology is sort of founded on two-dimensional symplectic topology. But in dimension 2, the adjective symplectic is kind of boring. Everything is symplectic in dimension 2. Symplectic in dimension 2 just means area, it just means area. Symplectic things start getting really interesting once you get to 4 dimensions and above. And so this is at the heart of a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, which is the fact that 3 dimensions is kind of bootstrapped from just area preserving geometry, whereas once you get into higher dimensions of contact topology, you have as a foundation like very non-trivial symplectic geometry. Okay. So there's my spiel on contact structures. Maybe I'll take a water break, pause for questions. There are any.
This is maybe a not so interesting question, but is like dimension 4 symplectic topology considered high dimensional or low dimensional symplectic geometry? I'm just curious.
I guess I would call it low dimensional, since I would call low dimensional topology is like 3 and 4 dimensional topology in general.
Okay.
That's a fair question. Yeah. It's low dimensional topology, but symplectic in dimension 4 is a non-trivial adjective. I guess that's what's important. Whereas symplectic in dimension 2 doesn't really mean a whole lot.
Well, I just chip in with a comment. Actually, I would think dimension 4 is considered as middle dimension.
We can go with that.
It's distinguished from lower dimension and higher dimensional phenomena.
I'm okay with that.
So okay.
As long as we agree that 5 counts as high, then I'm happy. So
okay.
all right. So half of the Giroux correspondence is contact structures. The other half is something called an open book decomposition. So let me just talk a little bit about this really quickly. And I'll start by saying, well, okay, so I've given you one example of a contact manifold, or maybe 2, I don't know, at most 2. And you could ask, how can I build other ones? So Thurston and Winkelnkemper in the 70s gave a recipe for how to build lots of contact manifolds. And so here's what you do. So the recipe as input, there are 2 pieces of data. The first is that you start with a surface with boundary. So that's this picture here, an orientable surface with boundary. And the second piece of data is a diffeomorphism. So diffeomorphism of the surface, that's the identity near the boundary. With those 2 pieces of data, here's what you can do. First, take your surface and thicken it. So this is like surface cross an interval. Then I'm going to do something that I'm too lazy to write down carefully, but I hope the picture is clear enough, which is that I have an interval's worth of these boundary components, and I'll quotient by identifying all of those boundary components as 1. This gives me kind of like a bouquet of surfaces, a book, where all of the pages are copies of the surface and they're kind of glued along this common boundary. So I have a book of surfaces, and then you're going to do something that you probably shouldn't ever do with a real book, which is you'll take the top front cover and glue it to the back cover. But the gluing you do with this diffeomorphism phi. Okay. So I have this book. I glue the front cover to the back cover along phi. And on the one hand, or first of all, this gives you a closed 3 manifold. It gives you a smooth 3 manifold. But not only does it give you a closed, smooth three-manifold, but it builds a contact structure into the three-manifold. So the output of this recipe that I'll call OB for open book of the surface and the diffeomorphism is a three-manifold, but one that also has a contact structure built into it. And I won't go into detail about how you get the contact structure, but the idea is that your contact structure basically looks as tangent as possible to all of the pages. And then as you approach the binding, necessarily the contact planes have to twist to kind of be right side up, and then they come back down on the other side. So when you glue two pages together, they kind of do this. Not precise at all. It doesn't really matter, but you get a contact structure by effectively requiring the contact structure to be as tangent as possible to the pages. That's the idea. Okay, so this is what I'll call an open book construction, or if I have a contact manifold that arises from this way, I'll say that the contact manifold admits an open book decomposition. You can say all of this much more carefully, but I won't for the sake of the talk. Okay, so this is one way to build a contact manifold, but actually it turns out, so this is a fact due to Giroux 20 some years ago, every contact manifold arises in this way. So you can get every single contact manifold in dimension 3 by doing this construction. In other words, every contact manifold admits a supporting open book decomposition. So this fact here is sort of an existence result. It's an existence result for open books. And once you have an existence result, the natural question to ask is, to what extent is this construction unique? In other words, can I get the same contact manifold from this construction with different input data? And as you can see, the answer is that it's not unique. It's possible to have two different on the nose open books that give you the same contact manifold. So the simplest example is what I've drawn here. One open book, or one kind of pair of open book data that you can start with, is as page, as surface, I'll just use the disk. And then my gluing map to glue the front cover to the back cover, well, it's the only thing it can be up to isotopy if your page is a disk, which is the identity. And then there's a couple claims. The first of all is that as a manifold, you can just ask, what manifold do you get? I don't think it's believable if you think about it for a little bit, that if you take a disk and you kind of inflate it and then just glue the top to the bottom, you get S3. But you actually get the standard contact structure that I talked about a few slides ago. So that's the first claim. But then here's a different open book. This time I'll take an annulus page, and the monodromy, the gluing map that I'll use, is a right-handed Dane twist around the core circle. So the way I've drawn that is I have a solid arc here. That's kind of I'm taking like an arc basis for the page, or this is in the domain. And then the dashed arc is the image of that solid arc under the monodromy map. So I claim, again, that as a smooth manifold, the result is still S3. But not only that, the contact structure is the same. There are a bunch of different contact structures on S3, but if you do this right-handed Dane twist monodromy map, you get the standard one. You get standard S3. Okay, so there's evidently a failure of uniqueness. More generally, this example that I described is a special case of a so-called positive stabilization operation. So here's what you can do. Take any open book. So I have some page, some monodromy map, find an arc embedded in the page. Any arc will do, such that the feet of the arc are on the boundary of the page. And then I do the following. So to the page, I attach a one handle along the feet of the arc to give myself a new page. And then whatever monodromy map I had before, I'll compose that with a right-handed Dane twist around the circle, which is the union of this arc with the core of the handle. And the fact also due to Giroux is that if you do this positive stabilization operation along any arc, it doesn't change the contact manifold that you get. So this always preserves the contact manifold. And in fact, so here's the celebrated Giroux correspondence in dimension 3. Giroux found out that this positive stabilization operation completely captures the failure of uniqueness. In other words, there is a correspondence between all of the contact manifolds you can get, all three-dimensional contact manifolds, with open books modulo this positive stabilization operation. In other words, I'll rephrase this, and I have this written down this way in a few slides, but there are kind of two things in this statement. First of all, every contact manifold admits an open book decomposition. That's the existence statement. Moreover, if you have two open book decompositions of the same contact manifold, they are the same up to a sequence of these positive stabilization moves. So that's the Giroux correspondence in dimension 3. Now, here's the philosophical implication of this, which has been kind of an important, this has been exploited to great effect in three-dimensional contact topology. It basically tells you that three-dimensional contact topology is the same as mapping class group theory. It's in kind of one-to-one correspondence with diffeomorphism groups of surfaces, modulo this sort of positive stabilization operation. So that's a nice fact. And then here's a really important, I have a few important points about what's under the hood of the Giroux correspondence. So the statement is important and useful, but I would say probably what's more important to kind of the theory of three-dimensional contact topology is the underlying ideas and the technology. So Giroux's proof in dimension 3 is rooted in what I would consider Morse theory. And Morse theory is great. It's very practical. It's down to earth. It's hands-on. And because of that, the kind of underlying techniques spawned a lot of progress in three-dimensional contact topology. So that's an important point. Giroux's three-dimensional work was rooted in Morse theory. Okay, that's the situation in dimension 3. You can ask, what did Giroux know, or what did we, humanity know in higher dimensions prior to the work that I'm going to talk about? So here's what we knew in higher dimensions. First of all, you can ask if the recipe, if the open book recipe still works. Can I still do some sort of similar construction to produce contact manifolds? And the answer is yes, but in higher dimensions, your input data has to be symplectic. So in dimension 3, my page was just a regular old surface. But in higher dimensions, if you want to get a contact structure, you have to start with a symplectic manifold. Specifically, you have to start with an exact symplectic manifold with boundary. Okay. Moreover, the gluing map that you use, the monodromy, has to be a symplectomorphism, an exact symplectomorphism. But up to adding in sort of the adjective, appropriate symplectic adjectives, the same recipe works. And if you do this open book construction, not only do you get a closed odd dimensional manifold, but it comes equipped with a contact structure. Okay. So the recipe with kind of sufficient modifications, sufficient symplectic modifications still works. Giroux at the time also knew that you can still get every single contact manifold from this construction. So it was a fact even back then that every single contact manifold in every dimension arises from this open book construction. In fact, he even knew that you can ask your page to be a Weinstein domain, if that means anything to you. Weinstein domains are really, really nice types of symplectic manifolds. There's symplectic manifolds that admit symplectic handle decompositions. So here he knew this back in the day too. And there's also a positive stabilization operation, which is more or less the same with, again, appropriate modifications. Now what you do is instead of finding an arc in the page, you find an embedded half-dimensional Lagrangian disk, where the boundary of the disk sits on the boundary of the page. And then instead of attaching a one handle, you attach a critical N handle along the boundary of the disk. And then you can cap off the Lagrangian sphere with the core disk of your, you have a Lagrangian disk, cap it off with the core disk of the handle you attached, and that gives you a Lagrangian sphere in the new page. And then there's a symplectic Dane twist operation. It's like a higher dimensional version of a Dane twist that you can do around Lagrangian spheres. And this is what positive stabilization is in higher dimensions. And it's still the fact that if you do this positive stabilization operation, you always get the same contact manifold. Okay, so again, up to adding in the word symplectic everywhere, it's basically the same story, but there's a very important difference with what Giroux did back in the day. So in dimension 3, all of his arguments, all of this was conceptualized using kind of, Morse theoretic techniques. However, in dimension 5 and up, he had to do something completely different in order to prove existence of, say, Weinstein open books. He did something very different, namely using kind of a contact version of this approximately holomorphic technology due to Donaldson. So I won't go into that right now, but it's very different, kind of unwieldy, hard to use in practice compared to something like Morse theory. So because the proof technique in dimension 5 and up was so different, the kind of stabilization equivalence statement that he was able to get was not so complete. He was able to say, well, if you happen to have two open books that were obtained from this approximately holomorphic type business, those are equivalent up to positive stabilization, but it wasn't a complete stabilization equivalence. And like I said, in practice, it's it's kind of hard to use because if you have a random open book, I have no idea how you would tell if it comes from this kind of Donaldson construction. So in higher dimensions at the time, the statements were a little bit less complete, but like I said, kind of the more important underlying phenomenon was that the technology was completely different. He didn't have the kind of Morse theoretic methods to the extent that he did in dimension 3 to do the same kind of arguments. So I think, yes. So here's the recap of the kind of context going into my work. In all dimensions, and all this is essentially due to Giroux at the time, in all dimensions, every contact manifold admits an open book decomposition even with Weinstein pages. However, the way that he thought about this in dimension 3 was completely different from dimensions 5 and above. In dimension 3, he used very down-to-earth, practical Morse theoretic methods. But in dimension 5, he had to do something completely different just because the technology wasn't available, at least not to the extent that you could use it to do these kinds of things. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about the main results. I'll take another water break. There are questions. All right. Well, so this is the situation until a few years ago, where my collaborators, Honda and Huang, rolled up their sleeves and said, okay, we need to figure out how to port the three-dimensional technology, or at least, the appropriate level of usability into higher dimensions. So I've been vaguely saying blah, 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 Morse theory. Really what I'm referring to in the context of contact topology is something called convex surface theory or convex hypersurface theory. Convex surface theory was invented by Giroux, and this is what he used to such great effect. But there are a lot of technical difficulties in higher dimensions that were sort of insurmountable for a while. But then in a couple papers in 2018 and 2019, Honda and Huang established a lot of the necessary technical kind of foundational results. In particular, they proved a genericity result. That's sort of the most important thing that they were able to do that we didn't know prior, is that this very nice class of hypersurface in a contact manifold is kind of sufficiently generic. So I haven't told you what it means to be convex. It doesn't really matter right now for the purpose of the story, but maybe I'll say, so at the very beginning when I was talking about, blah, 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 contact topology is important, one of my reasons was that if you care about symplectic manifolds and you want to chop them up and glue them together, the natural structure along which you cut and glue is a contact structure. Well, you can ask, what if I want to understand contact manifolds by chopping them up into simpler pieces and gluing them back together? The appropriate type of hypersurface along which you chop and glue is this convex class of hypersurfaces. So that's why it's so important for doing this kind of Morse theoretic based math. Anyway, a few years ago, they laid a lot of the foundations. In particular, one of the things they were able to do up here is reprove Giroux's existence result. So the statement here is not new. Giroux knew this already at the time. Every contact manifold admits an open book, But Honda and Huang gave a new proof that works in all dimensions. You don't need to distinguish between dimensions 3 and 5 and up in their proof. It's all the same. And it's sort of the correct moral successor of what Giroux did in dimension 3, just doing it in all dimensions now. So that was 2019. And then, okay, finally, I joined the party last year, and we finished off the complete stabilization equivalence in all dimensions. So here's, I guess, what the name of my talk is referring to. It's a Giroux correspondence in all dimensions. So this, first of all, the statement is new. This was not known to this extent before, that in any dimension, if you have any two open books, Weinstein pages, that's an important assumption. I'm sweeping some other details under the rug, but if you have two open books with Weinstein pages, they are equivalent up to this positive stabilization operation. So that's a new statement, but like I said, what I'm more excited about is the fact that the technology underlying this is sort of the moral successor of Giroux's three-dimensional technology. And then just as an example of a corollary, is this statement about Lefschetz vibrations of Weinstein domains. So every Weinstein domain admits a Lefschetz vibration structure. In all dimensions, this is due to Giroux and Pardon, 2017, using approximately holomorphic stuff. And they conjecture in their paper a kind of stabilization equivalence type of thing for Lefschetz vibrations on Weinstein domains. And we were able to conclude this using the same sort of ideas that we did here. Okay, so here's the Giroux correspondence in all dimensions. That's what we did. And then I'll spend the rest of the time seeing if I can give you some of the main ideas. The first of which is I need to describe a little bit how we think about open book decompositions in our work. So the way I defined this open book construction might lead you to draw a picture kind of like this. So what does this picture mean? I have a page. So this is like a symplectic manifold with boundary. Here's the binding, and then there's away from the binding, there's this S1 foliation of the manifold by these pages. So this is kind of the toy picture that you get from an open book decomposition. And the first observation is that, well, here's what I can do. Take a page, take a second page somewhere on the other side, whatever that means, kind of the opposite angle. And then if I glue those two pages together, I can snip, snap, chop the manifold in half along the union of those two pages. That would get me this picture. So then I have a piece down here and a piece down here, and I'm gluing those two pieces together via some sort of gluing map, which is essentially determined by the monodromy. And you should think about this as being a sort of Heegard splitting in higher dimensions for your contact manifold. But it's like a Heegard splitting that's sort of contact compatible. Each of these pieces are so-called contact handle bodies. And really what I mean by that is each piece here, if you look at like the bottom piece, it looks like a thickened version of your Weinstein domain page. So it's like a thickened Weinstein domain. That's what I would call a contact handle body. So really, you can think about an open book decomposition as being like a higher dimensional Heegard splitting into two contact handle bodies. So then related to that perspective, Well, if you think about the two pieces as being built out of contact handles, by which I just mean thickened versions of Weinstein handles, then what we've done is we've took our contact manifold and completely decomposed it into contact handles, where contact handles are just thickened Weinstein handles. And up to some details, you can sort of think about the kind of open books that we're considering as corresponding to decompositions of your contact manifold into these contact handles, thickened Weinstein handles. So this is really the way that I'll be thinking about these open book decompositions. So with that in mind, how do you prove, not you or not even me, but how do Honda and Huang prove existence of open books? Well, what you want to do is you want to prove existence of some kind of contact Morse function or existence of a contact handle decomposition. So the way they do this is they start with just some random smooth Morse function that has nothing to do with the contact structure. You just need kind of a starting point. And I'll kind of draw that by drawing some level sets. What is a Morse function? It's sort of just a way to sweep through your manifold with suitably generic level sets. And the main thing that they did was prove this genericity result for this nice class of convex hypersurfaces. So roughly, you can take all these smooth level sets defined by your smooth Morse function, wiggle them so that they're convex, and then you can show that with this kind of, once you sweep through your contact manifold with these convex hypersurfaces, that builds, that gives you a contact Morse function, that gives you a kind of contact handle decomposition, and hence gives you an open book decomposition. So this is the idea behind their existence proof. I have some more details, but I think for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over this to tell you about the main idea behind what I was a part of, which is how then do you prove a kind of stabilization equivalence statement? Well, so I'll fix a contact manifold. And then suppose we have two different open book decompositions of that one contact manifold. The goal is to prove that the open book decompositions are the same up to some positive stabilizations. And the observation based on what I just described is you can think about the existence problem, existence of open books, as being like a one parametric version of this hypersurface theory. You get an open book by sweeping through your contact manifold with a one parameter family of these suitably nice hypersurfaces. So I have a one parameter family here. I have a one parameter family here. If I want to understand how those one parameter families are related, well, I'll just pick a suitably generic two parameter family of these hypersurfaces that connects them. And when you do this, so basically what we do is like a two parametric contact surf theory, sort of the way to think about it. When you pick some sort of nice enough two parameter family of hypersurfaces, there will be a bunch of kind of codimension two phenomena that happen, specifically behavior of the characteristic foliation on your hypersurface, the way the dynamics work out, different kinds of degeneracies of singular points of the foliation. But the point is that all of these degenerations and funny things that happen when you look at families of hypersurfaces, you can translate all of this into open book language by the kind of translation I described at the beginning. So what we do is we kind of analyze all of these codimension 2 phenomenon and show that, well, the family that you get on the left and the family that you get on the right, all of these things that happen in the middle can be phrased in terms of this positive stabilization operation. And so that's a lot of the hard work that goes into our proof. Okay, and I think, yeah, last slide. Let me finish with like the moral of the story. So now that I've talked about all of this, I'll draw this picture again that I showed you earlier, which is some sort of indication of the relationship between contact and symplectic topology. And I also wrote this down earlier. This, I said, was the kind of philosophical consequence of the Giroux correspondence in dimension 3, namely that 3-dimensional contact topology is basically just 2-dimensional surface mapping class group theory. The philosophical implication, I guess, of our work is that in general, 2n plus 1-dimensional contact topology is basically 2n-dimensional symplectic mapping class group theory. It really amounts to understanding the group of symplectomorphisms of, say, a symplectic manifold. And that's really hard. Symplectic mapping class group theory is hard. And that sort of captures why higher dimensional contact topology is so hard. So I guess that's the takeaway that you can talk about at the dinner table tonight. So, okay, I'll stop there. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions?